Head coach Dan Quinn walked into this week's press conference and delivered a gut punch that nobody saw coming, confirming a surgery that instantly changes the outlook for one of this defense's most important pieces heading into the regular season. And that wasn't even the only injury bombshell dropped in this one press availability. Buckle up, because this is a heavy one. Let's start with the headline that's going to dominate the conversation for the next several days. Defensive tackle Johnny Newton underwent surgery, and Dan Quinn confirmed it directly. No dancing around the subject. Newton traveled up to New York for a consultation, and rather than waiting around, the decision was made to move forward with the procedure the very next day. The good news, if there's any silver lining buried in all of this, is that the surgery itself was successful, and Newton was already back in town as the news broke. But make no mistake, this is a real blow. Quinn confirmed that Newton is going to miss a significant amount of time, and as of right now, the exact timeline remains unclear. The coaching staff says they'll have a much better sense of that recovery window in a few weeks once the early stages of rehab play out. What makes this particular injury sting even more is the context surrounding it. According to Quinn, Newton entered this offseason in absolutely tremendous shape, someone who put in serious, visible work to elevate his game, heading into a pivotal third season. To have that kind of dedicated preparation get interrupted by a surgery is exactly the type of gut-wrenching football irony that makes this news hit even harder. Quinn did leave the door open for optimism down the road, expressing hope that at some point the team gets the opportunity to see that version of Newton on the field again. But for now, this is a significant subtraction from a defensive line room that was counting on him to take a real step forward. As if that wasn't enough heavy news for one press conference, Quinn also had to address a fresh setback with starting center Nick Allegretti, whose long-awaited return to practice hit a snag almost immediately. According to Quinn, Allegretti's calf tightened up during practice, prompting the training staff to pull him off the field and send him for imaging that same night. The results actually came back clean, which is genuinely good news. No structural damage, no dramatic setback, but out of caution, the team is going to hold him out of this weekend's game entirely, keeping him back to continue rehabbing before getting another evaluation heading into next week's joint practice sessions. When pressed directly on how concerned he actually is about Allegretti's extended absence, Quinn didn't sugarcoat it. He acknowledged that anytime a player, even one as experienced and accomplished as Allegretti, misses this much of training camp, it's a real issue. Reps and repetition matter, especially for a center who needs to be dialed in online calls and communication at the point of attack. Quinn was candid that the lack of what he called time on task is not ideal, even for a proven veteran presence. He also confirmed, when asked directly, that the missed time has genuinely made it more difficult for Allegretti to fully settle into his leadership role up front, directing calls and getting the rest of the offensive line comfortable around him. Quinn expressed hope that as the team heads toward next week, Allegretti will finally be able to string together a full, uninterrupted week of practice, something that has eluded him for the majority of camp so far. Now let's turn to the situation generating the most anxiety across the fan base, the ongoing saga surrounding cornerback Trey Amos. Quinn did offer a genuinely encouraging update here, describing Amos as trending in the right direction with his ankle sprain, which is affecting the same general area where he previously underwent a procedure. Quinn was careful to frame this as real, measurable improvement, noting that Amos remains in the structured, return-to-play process, working through running and cutting progressions as the medical staff clears him step by step. The bottom line, though, is that he will not play in this weekend's game. Improvement, yes. Full clearance, not yet. There's also real uncertainty hanging over the availability of franchise quarterback Jaden Daniels for this upcoming matchup. When directly asked whether Daniels will play on Saturday, Quinn kept his answer intentionally vague, explaining that his final decision will depend on getting a complete picture of the health situation across the rest of the roster before locking anything in. That is not exactly a resounding confirmation, and it suggests the door remains open for Washington to hold their franchise quarterback out of this game entirely, especially given everything else currently piling up on the injury report. On a slightly less dramatic but still notable injury front, running back Rashad White is dealing with a hamstring issue that he picked up on the very last play of a recent joint practice session against Miami. Quinn struck an optimistic tone here, indicating that while White won't play in this upcoming game, he is genuinely close to a return. Quinn even praised White's mentality directly, describing him as fully locked in and doing everything he possibly can behind the scenes to get back onto the field as quickly as possible, essentially trying to speed up his own recovery without drawing attention to it. The team, however, is being deliberately cautious given the nature of soft tissue injuries and the very real risk of aggravating something that hasn't fully healed. Speaking of soft tissue injuries, Quinn used a good chunk of this press conference to address the broader pattern showing up not just within this organization, but across the entire league this preseason. When asked how his approach to managing these kinds of injuries has evolved over the years, Quinn pointed to real structural changes in how teams handle the ramp-up period of training camp, particularly during those crucial opening days when soft tissue injuries tend to spike most dramatically. He talked about scaling back the volume of long-distance running early in camp, shifting instead towards smaller, more controlled bursts, while trusting that game speed intensity will naturally show up once live action begins. He was also firm on one particular point. The organization refuses to rush a player back into action before they're fully cleared through the complete return-to-play process, specifically because research and experience have shown that players coming back from one injury face a real, elevated risk of suffering an entirely different injury if that timeline gets rushed. Quinn was also asked directly whether the league-wide shift toward reduced contact practices, implemented largely for player safety reasons, has made it harder from a coaching standpoint to properly toughen players up and prepare them physically for the rigors of an NFL season. He pushed back on that idea pretty firmly, insisting that this specific training camp has actually gone really well in terms of effort and physical readiness, even without some of the older school contact methods. He pointed out that camp, in a sense, is technically still ongoing in certain ways, even with fans no longer in attendance, given that another joint practice remains on the schedule for the following week. His overall message was one of confidence in how hard this specific roster has worked to get ready, framing any additional strain now as an investment that pays dividends once the games start counting for real, especially with a larger overall roster this year, giving the coaching staff more flexibility to manage bodies carefully. There was also an interesting exchange about exactly how the coaching staff decides which players benefit most from seeing extended action in this upcoming preseason matchup. Rather than pointing to entire position groups, Quinn framed it more individually, singling out specific players he's genuinely excited to watch build on strong opening performances, including a couple of receivers who flashed real ability with some nice catches and impressive movement in the season opener. He also noted his curiosity about seeing how certain cornerbacks perform later in this upcoming game once the matchups against opposing depth pieces begin to separate the pack. His broader philosophy centers on opportunity. When injuries open the door for a backup to step in, the real story becomes what that player actually does with the chance in front of them, and Quinn made clear he's watching closely for players who rise to that moment. On the topic of how much game action starters and key contributors should actually see in a game like this, Quinn resisted giving any kind of one-size-fits-all formula. Rather than setting a fixed snap count target, he described a customized approach for every player, weighing factors like adjusting to a completely new opposing system, getting comfortable with in-game communication and play calls, and simply building the physical and mental rhythm of live competition. Whether that player is on the defensive side of the ball or carrying it, he was clear that there's no simple mathematical formula balancing the benefit of extra reps against the inherent injury risk of additional snaps, framing it instead as an ongoing case-by-case decision built around what will most benefit each individual player's readiness heading into the regular season. Quinn also touched on special teams evaluation, an often overlooked but genuinely important battleground for players fighting to lock down a roster spot, sometimes for the very first time in their careers. He explained that speed is the #1 trait he's looking for on punt and kickoff coverage and return units, but he was quick to point out that evaluating a player's ability on kickoff coverage specifically might be the hardest evaluation of all, given how difficult it is to consistently win a full-speed one-on-one block in space. He praised the technical drill work being run by his special teams staff, crediting them with teaching players real, translatable technique like setting up blockers and working across the formation to disengage cleanly, something that most college programs simply don't emphasize the same way. He specifically referenced a couple of standout special teams reps from the preseason opener that caught his eye, praising the toughness and discipline shown by a few core special teams contributors who managed to stack blockers and fight through traffic in space, exactly the kind of small, repeatable indicators he and his staff are hunting for as final roster decisions approach. Finally, Quinn was asked to reflect on how last season's brutal string of injuries shaped his overall approach heading into this current campaign, and his answer offered a pretty revealing look into how deliberately he's been planning for exactly this kind of adversity. He referenced going all the way back to this year's off-season minicamp, where he intentionally gave the most practice reps to players who had historically played the least, essentially stress testing the depth of this roster early, well before injuries forced anyone's hand. His stated goal was simple: understand exactly where the real depth stands across every single position group, evaluate backup-level talent on both execution and mental processing, and build a genuine, functional picture of who's actually ready to step up the moment an opportunity arrives. He described his mindset shifting immediately the moment a player goes down in practice, with his attention turning almost instantly toward whoever's next in line at that spot, tracking whether that next player has developed enough and been given enough opportunity to actually prove themselves when real chances come calling. It's clear that last year's avalanche of injuries left a lasting mark on how this coaching staff is approaching roster construction and player evaluation this time around. And based on how directly Quinn addressed every single injury question thrown at him in this press conference, it's obvious this remains one of his top priorities heading into the stretch run of the preseason. So, where does that leave the Commanders heading into this weekend's matchup against Detroit? A significant defensive lineman just went under the knife with no clear return timeline. A veteran center just suffered a fresh setback in his attempt to reclaim his starting job and his voice in the huddle. A promising but oft-injured cornerback remains stuck in limbo, trending the right direction, but not yet cleared. A young running back is tantalizingly close to returning, but still on the shelf for this particular game. And the availability of the franchise quarterback himself remains a genuine open question just days out from kickoff. This is a lot for any coaching staff to manage, but if Quinn's comments about depth, preparation, and disciplined return-to-play protocols are any indication, this is a staff that has clearly been bracing for exactly this kind of adversity all offseason long. So here's what I want to know from you. How worried are you about losing Johnny Newton for a significant chunk of time? And do you think this defensive line has enough depth to absorb that kind of blow? Drop your thoughts down in the comments because I want to hear exactly where your concern level sits after hearing all of this straight from the head coach himself. If breaking down these press conferences and pulling out everything that actually matters is something you appreciate, do me a favor and smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel grow. And if you're not subscribed yet, now is the time because there is a lot more injury coverage and roster analysis coming your way as this team barrels toward week 1. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.